It was almost exactly 15 years ago that we discovered the place we have come to call Twa Corbies Hollow, a little valley atop one of the mountains of Nova Scotia's highlands. In fact, it is one of the highest places in Nova Scotia, and the wild weather coming out of the north, the east, and the Atlantic, combined with the relatively higher altitude of this location, has given the hollow a climate that's similar to regions considerably further north. And this, I think, is one of the factors that have protected the hollow, keeping it for so long wild and green. And I have come to think of Twa Corbies Hollow as a magical place, a rare land where nature still holds sway, and occasionally, perhaps, there is a little magic. But the hollow was not always as it is today. Some 30 years ago, much of it had been ravaged by clear-cutting. It was a tragic shame. I found many tree stumps on this property well over 100 years old, once a realm of hardwood forests, butchered. But patches of health remained. And Daphne and I acquired Twa Corbies Hollow almost exactly 15 years ago. So here, with the beginning of 2022, I thought it might be fun and interesting to take a look at the progress the forest has made in its path toward healing. Because, while we have rarely ever spoken of this to anybody, we have been engaged in restoring this land, this forest, ever since we acquired it a decade and a half ago. Several things have played crucial roles in the restoration of this forest. One is that Twa Corbies Hollow was surrounded by healthy forests. That is rare in Nova Scotia these days. Finding large tracts of healthy Acadian forest is almost unheard of, but the rocky, steep topography played important roles in protecting this area, and that surrounding healthy forest provided a biodiversity bank which contributed to the re-establishment of nature in Twa Corbies Hollow. The hollow itself is an old place, and the ancient cottage Daphne and I call home is a great example of that. The place is so old, there's no record of when it was built. One elder of the region once told us it just seemed like the old cottage had always been here, and it is made of ancient hand-carved timbers, which have in more recent years been covered over with modern siding to help preserve them against the weathering of time. When the Scots first came to Nova Scotia, they were conscientious of being poor, and it was not uncommon for them to build log homes but square the logs so that they could make them look, in so much as possible, like milled wood. Being able to use more expensive milled wood in those days was a sign of wealth. But our ancient cottage is a sign of just how old this region is, and I suspect the surrounding forests were one of the first regions homesteaded when the old Scots came to this land many centuries ago. It is not uncommon deep in the surrounding forest to find the remnants of ancient cabins and cottages, as well as the old stone walls that resulted from the clearing of land and the marking of boundaries. Though sometimes those walls are nearly invisible as they are moss and lichen covered with age. And around these areas one may often find what appear to be clusters of tree trunks growing from a single point in the ground. This is evidence of old European styles of forestry, that is to say, coppicing. Here and there deep in the forest I'll find entire regions of trees which have clearly been coppiced in the past. Coppicing is practice in which hardwood trees are cut in the winter. These stumps will often regrow quickly, but instead of a single large tree will form various shoots of trees coming out of a single stump, and dating them in their growth as a large and established root system already laid into the earth beneath them. Also, I think the old Europeans were smart enough not to cut all their woods at once. They didn't look at 10,000 acres of land and say, oh yeah, let's chop all that down. And so the clear cutting of Twa Corbies Hollow was somewhat patchy. And because the land was only partially cut here and there, erosion was not as bad as it might have been, and that is particularly important. The hollow is well watered, there are springs everywhere. But as there were also copses of trees growing everywhere, the soil was preserved. And here at the top of the highlands, the ground is rocky, and the soil is thin to begin with. In most places, barely a finger length deep. If what little there is wasn't preserved, it would be impossible for trees to grow back. But the patchy cut forest was able to hold the topsoil, thus enabling the establishment of young seedlings. So, by dint of the fact that the people of the old times were just plain wiser when it came to maintaining their forests, they didn't cut in massive clear cuts, and they used a coppicing style when they cut, in order to allow timber forests to quickly and efficiently regrow. The hollow was fortunately spared the worst of the depredations of modern forestry. And being one of the more remote areas of Nova Scotia, in highlands that can be difficult to access, there were healthy surrounding woodlands which not only protected the land itself, but formed a biodiversity bank so that our re-establishing forests had a wide range of biodiversity upon which to draw in their regrowth. So, what strategy, you might ask, have Daphne and I taken in restoring this forest? The truth is, largely it's been hands-off. Forests in one form or another have existed on this planet for nearly 500 million years, almost since the dawn of the first complex life. At first they existed in the form of giant fungi, tall as trees, and various genera of plants have developed the tree form multiple times throughout their evolutionary history. So in one way or another, forests, an amalgamation of large plants and smaller species that form complex, mutually supporting systems presenting emergent adaptive and dynamic intelligence, have evolved on this planet numerous times, and when given access to stable ecosystems and adequate biodiversity banks, they do their best, on their own, without human intervention. So it is true to say, and I firmly believe that Daphne and I have taken the best approach and done very little to intervene in the natural regrowth of our forests. All we have done is created of our land a protected space, one where there will never be clear cutting, and where the flora and fauna are free to go about their lives peacefully and find their own equilibrium. Indeed, the only steps I have taken is to occasionally remove some invasive species, as in a growth of Japanese knotweed I found growing in an open meadow, an ideal environment where it could multiply and take over. And occasionally I walk the wetlands around the springs and make sure no purple's loosestrife has found its way among the native plants. But apart from that, the land is free to grow as it will and do as it will, exactly as nature intended. And we have kept the land free of polluting and toxic chemicals such as glyphosate, in order to promote the growth of various kinds of herbaceous foliage, as well as a wide variety of tree species. Not just the tree species the forestry industry finds desirable, that's nonsense. All tree species are desirable and in fact necessary for their role in balancing the ecosystem. So we have kept the land free of chemicals such as glyphosate, in order to allow the woods to establish their own botanical biodiversity. And thus, in the sheltered places, bats, once common only a decade ago but now rare due to white nose syndrome, can find shelter and food. Great predatory birds such as eagles and owls are abundant, and the land is visited by larger terrestrial fauna, not just deer, but this is a place where both bobcats and lynxes meet, and either can be sighted, as well as the larger members of the weasel family. And during the summers, in the open breaks, where fireweed and goldenrod blossom, are abundant bees, bumblebees, honeybees, and other species, as well as numerous other pollinating insects. So you might say our fundamental strategy has been to keep a hands-off approach, keep the land pure, and be involved in advocacy to protect the surrounding biodiversity bank. And this, in short, is the secret of the regrowth of the hollow. In many places when we came here, the forest was little more than spindly trees, barely more than saplings. Now, it is true forest, in intermediate growth, but forest nonetheless. A beautiful place to be proud of, a place where nature reigns. And if we have our way, ultimately, a place to go wild. Thank you for watching. The Naturalist program is committed to the reliable coverage of natural science and environmental issues. If you like our program, please take a moment to subscribe and like.
Autumn leaves are turning brown, branches bare.